So welcome to the sheep session. We're delighted to have some great speakers this afternoon. So first we'll hear from Leslie Stubbings. Leslie's an independent sheep consultant who's worked in the sheep industry with sheep farmers for over 30 years now. And she's also played a central role in shaping SCOPs and instigating SCOPs, which have really driven the mission of sustainable parasite control in sheep forward. I mean, she continues to be actively engaged with stakeholders from across the industry to drive that progress and to increase uptake of good parasite control across the industry, really. Can everybody hear me okay? Please do let me know if there's issues.
Much better, thank you.
No worries. So Leslie will be getting the ball rolling this afternoon with a presentation, but we've also got Professor Eric Morgan on the call as well. So he's joined us again this afternoon. As many of you will have heard yesterday, Eric's a professor of veterinary parasitology at Queen's University Belfast, and he's a diplomat of the European College of Veterinary Parasitology. Eric's research focuses on the epidemiology of parasites and on translating science into practice at field level as well, engaging farmers and working with them, like Leslie, to drive that progress onwards. So Eric will be joining for the discussion afterwards. If you do have any questions that crop up during Leslie's presentations, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll revisit them during the Q&A session. But without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Leslie. Thanks.
Thank you, Sinead, and thank you everyone for coming on this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for the invitation, and also to Eric for a brilliant introduction to really what I'm going to say this afternoon. So I'll share my screen now, hopefully, and we can just run through some slides. Someone give me a thumbs up and tell me that that's working okay, hopefully. Yeah, okay, thank you. So as Sinead said, I come from a very practical side of this. So really what I'm going to try and do is to engender us with some discussion, because I'm fascinated to get all of your feedback as well. I think we all need to learn from each other as to just how we get what Eric said yesterday, this relatively complex change across to our end users. And I will revisit right at the end just something a little bit more about what SCOPS is and what it does, because I'll leave it to the end because perhaps it'll be a little bit more obvious as to why we feel we need that in the UK. So what I'm going to try and cover just very briefly, just a quick look at, well, what are our objectives? Because I think if we're going to discuss that, we need to be pretty clear as to what it is we're trying to do. How does this sit with our farmers' aims? And just examine a little bit about some of the issues with them. Some examples in the UK as to what's happening and not happening, and so we can explore why not. A few thoughts on the human element, and then some challenges and barriers to really hopefully kickstart our discussion. Now, Gustavo gave me these 6 points when we were looking at setting up this session this afternoon. And no, I hope everyone will agree that these 6 points cover really what it is we're trying to do. And there's a vast amount of science behind a lot of that. And Eric covered a lot of that yesterday. And I'm sure we'll dig back into some of that in the discussion this afternoon. But again, coming back to our objectives, you know, SCOPS was set up, we were set up 17 years ago now, a few more grey hairs since then, but our objective is to slow the development of anthelmintic resistance. That was our objective in the first place, was to get in there and try and slow the constantly increasing march of resistance. To do that, we want to reduce our reliance on anthelmintics and parasiticides and medicines in general, of course. Since we started 17 years ago, we've seen a huge amount of effort go into the AMR situation and antibiotics within agriculture. And, you know, so we can empathize with a lot of the work there. So it's a generalization, this, but with anthelmintics, we're trying quite hard. Only use them when necessary, and of course that's where TST and so on comes in, and we had a lot of discussion about that yesterday, and Johanna's, you know, some really interesting work there, and adopt alternative management solutions. So that's what we're really trying to do, and as Eric pointed out yesterday, it isn't easy, it's complicated, so we need to tackle it in the best way that we can. But what are our farmers' objectives? They're our objectives, but what are our farmers trying to do? As Sinead said, she was very kind to me. It's probably over 40 years now I've been a consultant. So I work with farmers on a one-to-one basis quite a lot as well. And, you know, they want healthy, productive and profitable animals. And I make no apologies for the fact that to me, those three things are completely synonymous. They want to control their costs, of course, and that includes labour. So anything that we are talking to them about has to address those issues too. They want to actually minimise risk and complexity, and that is completely juxtaposed to some of the messages we're trying to get out there. But can we turn that round? That's one of my challenges really to the group. And he's also likely to have a myriad of other things on his mind. Anything, it might just be that, you know, the taxman's coming or whatever. Parasite control is a very small part of what our farmer is actually doing. And the other thing, of course, is that, sure, we know from some recent stuff that's been done, the awareness of antibiotic resistance in the UK is very high. They know it's a problem, but the wormers are still working on my farm, aren't they? They still don't see it as their problem. And that's something, again, that we have to try and surmount. So if it ain't broken, why fix it? Why do I need to do something? How do we get them to actually make those changes if they can't see that what we're offering is complicated and they don't see the benefits? Unfortunately, many of our sheep farmers do not have the sort of information that you'll see just in the graph there. As one of my farms, it's about 2,500 lambs, and it's actually at their 90-day KPI weighing, and our target is a minimum of 30 kilos. So we can see that, sorry, that's the 8-week one, the target's 20 kilos, not 30. And we can see that most of them are way ahead of that. But of course, some of them are below, and they're obviously where we're looking at TST. And indeed, this farm is part of a trial we're doing at the moment with TST. So lack of information is a problem. And I'll come back to that in terms of potentially how we might address that in the future. So just a couple, 2 or 3 slides about the sheep industry in the UK and some of the things that we do. The UK industry is extremely diverse, and I'm sure that all of you from around the world, different countries, much of this will apply to you as well. We have hill and upland flocks. We have relatively intensive pasture-fed lowland flocks, a lot of them on permanent pasture, so parasite problems are paramount. We have even more intensive ones where we're actually feeding to supplement to get very high growth rates. We have forage crops, both within season and out of season, and increasingly that is going to be an option, and that is great from a parasite control point of view and giving us other alternatives. And we also have quite a lot of breeding work going on as well. Some of the more composite breeds and the more, if you like, modern breeds are actively looking at EBVs and breeding for mainly resistance rather than resilience. But again, that's an interesting debate. I would love your views on the merits of those. But we have a huge diversity in terms of systems. And I think it was Johannes said yesterday, every sheep farm is different. And I couldn't agree more. But equally, every sheep farmer is different. And as a consultant working with sheep farmers, I know that as much of my job is actually understand their capabilities and being able, sorry, that was put me off a little bit, but is their actual ability to be able to take the information. What are their priorities? They're totally different. So the personal aspects of the people we're dealing with are hugely important. And as a consultant, that's massively part of my job. We've also got social constraints, and with things like sheep scab, for example, the social stigma attached to sheep scab and thereby how it's dealt with is a massive issue that we have to take into consideration. And finally, within the 3 planks of human behaviour, we've got the structural influences, and that may be simply access to handling facilities. It may be access to fecal egg counts, and we've done a lot of work in the last 5 years, particularly access to regular fecal egg counting is so much easier, but there are still some structural barriers to the sorts of things that we want them to do. So, and we'll come back to some of the other structural opportunities that we've got in terms of PLF, precision livestock farming, and EID technology a little bit later. So if we just have a quick look at one of my high-level adopters, as I would call them, what they might be doing at the moment by way of sustainable control. And most of them will be using FECs routinely. They'll be doing them DIY, many of them using the FEC Pack Generation 2, so I can see everything electronically. They may be using MacMaster. Equally, some might be working with their vets and advisors. They'll be typically doing over 50 FECs a year. I think my best one does over 100. It's just second nature, almost obsessive with it now. They will be checking their AR status routinely, and they'll have the information on which to know that they need to do that, and they need to be using an effective wormer. They'll have a solid biosecurity routine, so we know that we're not going to import a problem that's going to derail us. They will have reduced their treatments per ewe per year to less than an average of a half per ewe using TST, getting away from treating unnecessarily. And in the UK, not that many years ago, that average was 3 treatments per ewe per year. So these guys are making a big difference in terms of their reliance. They're moving much, much closer to TST for both lambs and ewes. And that's just an example. We can come back to if anyone wants the detail, but this is a project I'm doing at the moment with farmers. And these are mob and sentinel fecal egg counts on a very high fecal egg count farm with a history of big problems. And we use BCS as our TST. Half of the ewes that were in slightly lower than ideal condition were treated at lambing time, and you get the drift. You see what happened to the overall fecal egg counts in that flock by using that TST. So we're looking at really practical ways that we can encourage farmers not to treat ewes particularly unnecessarily. And they're using pasture management and avoidance strategies and genetic gain through EBVs as well. So this is a very small number of farmers, though. These high achievers, these early high adopters, are relatively small. How do they do it? What underpins it? And I want to come back to this again in discussion. I hope you want to. They've got clear performance goals, and they're the means to monitor against targets. So they know that what they're doing is giving them benefit. And importantly, I've underlined this, they've got access to trusted professional advice. Now, that's not bigging myself up, but it is a problem. We do not have enough people in the field who are sufficiently au fait with this to be able to support some of these guys, and it is a major barrier. They don't do it all at once. They start slow and gain confidence, and they use management information to measure the benefits. And they also have quite a good baseline understanding of the worms and how they affect performance. So they get into the different species and what they're doing. And they have confidence in strategies other than wormers, but that all comes over time. It's a very slow process. As Eric alluded to yesterday, this is not something which happens overnight, and they have to have a trusted shoulder to lean on. Now, a low adopter, very different. And again, thinking about our human beings and perhaps you're thinking about the Dreyfus scale, where some people like things to be very per rote at the bottom end and very boxed up, and the high adopters will be at the top end of the Dreyfus scale. You've got to start somewhere, and it might be with these guys. We've made a lot of progress by persuading them that good, fit, healthy ewes do not need to be drenched pre-mating. And it's just simply getting them to do that and show them how much money they've saved. That can just be enough to trigger them to do something else the next year. It might be just that they're now aware of the group of active that they're using, whereas before it was just a trade name and they didn't know whether it was white, black, purple or pink. They just carried on. Maybe just get them to check the dose rate administration, and that is a key area. They might do a drench check, but it's blooming hard work with these guys to get them to do that as a first off. And they might listen to their neighbour in the pub talk, and they'll surely, as sure as God made little green apples, if they hear something negative, they will latch onto it. But those latter two things for these sort of slower adopters, people who are more cautious, those two things are really important at the end when we're trying to actually get them to change. Now, just quickly, a hill and upland flock, their main objectives it's probably going to be sheep scab for a lot of these guys. You know, when we've got major problems with ML resistance in nematodes, and as you all probably aware, we now do also have resistance in sheep scab mites to the MLs. So this is a real focus for a hill and upland flock. In terms of worm control, it's mainly hotspot areas in the heavily stocked areas nearest the farm. But because they have severe logistical restrictions and handling restrictions, these guys tend to be very focused on prophylaxis, and they will, oh, well, I'll do it anyway because I'm not going to be able to get the sheep back in. And it does make life quite difficult with them. And of course, we've also got fluke as a priority there as well. So a lot going on those farms. And at the moment, we have just got some funding to start some hotspot work with sheep scab in the UK. And the ELISA blood test that the More Done developed, and we now have commercially available, is a complete game changer as far as that's concerned. So that's a tool that is going to make our life tenable, really, in terms of trying to achieve something. So I'm conscious of time, just to sort of wind towards a conclusion, just to throw a few more things in terms of challenges and barriers. You know, it's a historical mountain we're trying to climb. It's over 40 years ago since I was trained in parasitology by some very erudite guys who Eric will know, Michelle and Gerald Coles as well. And this mountain's of our own making. As was the AMR stuff as well, you know. We have to be aware that it's deeply ingrained behaviour, and we have to be open and honest about it. And the objectives of our farmers are not always the same as us. They may have a different objective, so we do have to be mindful of that and not sort of shouty at them. They generally recognise it, AR, but they don't recognise it in their own flocks. Still, the vast majority don't have the information to know whether they have a problem. And we're trying to peddle something which is complex and actually requires quite a high skill set if we go all the way. They need provision, they need access to good advice. How do we do this? I pose the question. I'd love to hear people's discussion. And the messages need to be positive, not doom and gloom. We have had years in the 80s and 90s where anthelmintic resistance was peddled as a doom and gloom. Oh, look at all these surveys, we've got this amount of resistance. That is not going to get people to change their minds, I would venture to suggest. We need to give them a positive story. So the old picture, the old graph here that we had in the original Scops manual, done in the 80s, early 90s, Eric will correct me. People put this up and said, oh, look at all this anthelmintic resistance. And the farmers would sit in a meeting looking at each other saying, well, hang on a minute, I haven't got a problem. I know he hasn't got a problem, because we failed to tell them that we detected it, but we detected it early. And that was positive because it meant that there was something we could do with it. So now increasingly, this is just a remake of Scott's graph that we use. We are looking at it more positively and trying to get farmers to realise it's an insidious process. And if we can detect it early, we can do things about it, and we can slow down the process, which will mean that they can no longer use anthelmintics effectively. So let's concentrate a bit more on the how, perhaps, and a little bit less on the what. I'm just suggesting now, you can shout me down, that's fine. And I think consider our research, what our research we do, and consider what the positive impact is going to be before we get going. You know, I would challenge the need for lots and lots of AR survey results, because all they do, if you don't do it very carefully, is tell people bad news. It's got to be a positive message. And let's broaden our horizons. So maybe we start thinking about some of the other tools that will help us. It doesn't have to be high tech necessarily. You can use a marketing pattern, but we've got access to some fantastic technology now. And I've certainly, the last 7 or 8 years have been up to my eyeballs with KPI development and so on, body condition score particularly, using this technology. But we have major problems still with hardware talking to software. Software capability is still pathetically low. And, you know, there's a lot of work to be done there. And again, practical improvements. Just throwing this in now, you know, the Opti, the Simcro gun, that we had when we got the 4AD was an incredible breakthrough for somebody like me who's now got arthritis in their hand. But, you know, we have got Tapari type guns where we can automatically go for weight, and, you know, again with injectables, all sorts of things that we could perhaps be improving on more to, when we do use an anthelmintic, make sure it's 100% effective. And things like routine anthelmintic efficacy checks, making it easier. Speciation, which Eric mentioned yesterday, and he and I know we're involved in some work on that at the moment. And just really, again, I would appeal, this is really to my veterinary medicines directorate, but, you know, let's think about what the implications are of some of the new formulations that we register by way of these medicines, and particularly when we look at things like combinations. So I look forward to our discussions. I've just got a couple more slides just to finish off. I love this one. As a communicator, as somebody whose base is in extension and communication, I remind myself of this pretty regularly. George Bernard Shaw has it right, I think. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion it has taken place. And I think, you know, those of us who are in this day in, day out, need to remind ourselves that we still have to avoid that illusion whenever we can. And another one I love is Charles Darwin. And I think that might apply to all of us in the industry. Not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. And I do wonder whether or not, you know, it's great having a discussion like this, because I feel I still need to adapt to change and changing demands. Final slide. SCOPS came into being because we recognised in the UK that if we were going to tackle this problem, it had to be a pan-industry approach. It had to have buy-in at every level, horizontally and vertically integrated, so that we provided a consistent, trustworthy message at all times. Because if you add confusion to complexity, then it really is very, very difficult. So, and you'll see, and Sinead is currently the NOAA representative on SCOPS, and Eric feeds into SCOPS a lot as well. And, you know, it has provided us, I think, with a platform whereby we can have that consistency. So I just left that to the end, just in case anyone doesn't know what we're about. And I think my final slide, Sinead, is to say thank you. It was a bit of a gallop, but let's talk. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Leslie. That was great. I wonder, Eric, if I can perhaps hand over to you at this stage to ask some key questions about some of the points that Leslie raised during her presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have more slides to show you today. I think I squeezed as much in as I could yesterday, but really quite complementary to what Leslie has said. Some of the same messages are emerging, but in a much more practical way. I want to highlight a few things. One is that we do tend to see this problem through our own lens, and both Leslie and myself work mainly in the UK and Ireland. So we're talking mainly about temperate, grass-based production of sheep for lambs for meat. And that's not the same everywhere in the world. It is fairly typical of Northwestern Europe. It's also quite typical of New Zealand, right around the other side of the world, but there are many types of system in between. I can see that Ilias and Smaro, also diplomates of the European Veterinary Parasitology College, have joined us. The Mediterranean system is very different, often production for milk, often dry conditions, often nutrition is highly limiting at certain times of year. And so the same production objectives do not apply. So I would first appeal for you to take the kinds of examples that Leslie has shown and the sorts of things I said yesterday, and maybe focus some of the discussion on how this differs across production systems, actually. Other things that have really come out from Leslie's talk for me are the need to boil down what is a complicated epidemiological situation into not necessarily simple solutions, but simple messages. And maybe some of those messages are not so much about replacing one routine and prescriptive approach with another, and they're more about a simple message of how to adapt, really, and the sorts of things you can use to adapt. I think monitoring is crucial, and I think it also came out that in our search for more precision and reliability in things like anthelmintic resistance testing on farms. We've maybe made it out of the reach of many producers, and actually a less precise way of monitoring anthelmintic efficacy, but one that can be routinely applied and integrated into farm management would be useful. That's on the diagnostic side. It was interesting that breeding, selective breeding came up. And again, a lot of those methods, including EBVs, are predicated on the fact that you put a level playing field out for the animals in terms of challenge. And of course, when we apply TST, we're not doing that. We're helping some more than others. But maybe there's a reinvention of the selective breeding that does lend itself to targeted selective treatment, whereby we just record which animals we're helping and we arrive at a resilient or resistant animal that is the phenotype that fits the farmer's production objectives the best. I want to finish on the human element, because I think this is something that I appreciate the importance of, but don't work hugely on. But Leslie highlighted as very much the day-to-day of the advisor's work, and is crucial to how we move things around into more sustainable practice. She highlighted the personal, social, and structural factors that will strongly filter our message. So whatever we think we are saying, it has to be applicable in those particular circumstances, and what is heard is not necessarily what we say. One thing that does come out repeatedly from different social sciences, psychology work around this behavior change is that it is not the fear or the size of the problem that influences farmers' behavior as much as their sense of empowerment to do something about it, and their confidence that they have the knowledge or access to the advice needed to make change. There have been independent studies done in dairy cattle in Belgium, in sheep in Scotland, and in horse owners in England that show exactly the same thing. The influence is not really pushed by the scare tactic of resistance is happening, it's doom and gloom. Actually, they're much more likely to be pulled, influenced by those around them, but pulled into more sustainable practice by building some confidence that they have the knowledge and tools to achieve that. So those are the things I want us to keep in mind. I don't know how you want to handle the discussion, Sean-Ed, but we're quite a small number of people, so nobody needs to feel shy or reluctant to speak. I think we can put videos on and first invite any observations, particularly from people who have something to add or something that they disagree with from our presentations in the light of their own system.
Hi, everybody. In the spirit of collaboration, let's put all our cameras on so we can see each other's smiling faces, and I get a group shot of everybody, and we can save that and share that with us as we go forward. So thank you, everybody.
Hello. My question is so simple, sorry, because maybe in the conditions of Spain, at least, I'm very interested in how to monitorize the animals for a selective treatment. Really, in my country, there's only the fecal examination as lab tool for diagnosis, and even a body condition score is a help as well. But how can we decide the animals that needed an anthelmintic treatment only for gastrointestinal nematodes, of course, and fasciolehepatic abscess, because we have no immunological tools, for example, for diagnosis. Sorry, my question is so simple, but I think is very, very important as well, overall for advice for farmers and other vets, or for my teaching duties.
Eric, do you want to comment? I mean, I think from a practical point of view, I think there were lots of things talked about yesterday, weren't there, in terms of the possibilities. I mean, at the moment on my farms, we are using weight gain as the main indicator in lambs, and that's okay, but you still need to know what your objectives are, what that farm is actually capable of, what your objectives are. But in my experience with my farmers, providing we're also backing it up with a good knowledge of some fecal egg counting as well, so we know what's going on, that has worked, that has and is working quite well. And a project that we've currently got going is a project called Smart Sheep, which is taking the more undeveloped, the Andy Greer happy factor, algorithm, and we're actually looking at trying to integrate that into the precision livestock technology that we have available, and that's probably one of the first times that we've been trying to do that commercially. As far as use are concerned, I've condition scored so many thousands of ewes over the years where we've been looking at it from a nutritional point of view, but it's such a powerful KPI as far as our use is concerned. It sorts out all sorts of other problems. It highlights a lot of other problems. And the work I'm doing at the moment, certainly with the periparturient rise, the body condition, perhaps not body condition per se, but the ewes that are losing some condition in that period, just in the run up to lambing, that are, and Eric will be able to explain it better, but are demonstrating a pressure. They're demonstrating the fact that their immune system is under pressure because they are losing some body condition. They're nutritionally under pressure. Those are the ones that we're looking to target. So I'm sure other people have got lots of other things to say, but from a practical point of view, I'm gaining confidence with it all the time, but I need to know what's going on. You can't just go into a farm blind that you've never been on before.
Yeah, I will second that. And I think both for targeted group level and targeted selective within group treatments, aligning those indicators with what the farmer cares about for production is absolutely crucial, and the monitoring points and technologies they have available is absolutely crucial. And that is often sector specific, but also farm specific. So for example, coming from a UK situation where automated weighing was starting to come in, large flock sizes, growing lambs in summer, I tried that approach in France, in central France, southwestern France, and I thought I'd got myself into big trouble because I encouraged a farmer who's not automated weighing, but who was able and willing to weigh a few times in the summer to treat individuals on the basis of weight gain. We came back after 2 weeks and most of the lambs had lost weight. So I thought I'd led this farmer down a disastrous path until they told me that this was completely expected because there's very little grass at that time of year. They care nothing about growth rates in July and August. They only care about target weight in September. So you completely had to change our approach for that farm, acknowledging that what we've learned doesn't apply in that system. However, the second point is that if those production objectives are not matched by some parasitological information, we could be targeting parasites when they're not impacting the animals. So in that circumstance, it's important to even take group level fecal egg counts. If we had ways of measuring pasture larvae, that would be fantastic, but at least some parasitological context, because the situation is getting more variable year to year. So it could be that in some years, you're getting impact on production that is not parasitological, and in others, you're getting impact on production that is parasitological, and then you can apply appropriate interventions. So it's a complicated answer to your question, but I think it would be disingenuous it would be a mistake really to distill a simple mechanism or method from what Leslie is saying, what I've told you, and try to apply it in a different system, in a different country, in a different sector to farmers with different objectives. You first have to know what the farmer's objective is. You have to know where parasites fit in there. You have to know which production monitoring will allow the farmer to get information on multiple streams, both in terms of their production objectives and the likelihood the parasites are impacting them. You put all that together, and it's the job of the advisor, I think, to put that jigsaw together for that particular farm. And I agree with Leslie that our biggest hurdle is probably a lack of people who are knowledgeable enough about the detail, but close enough to the farm to make it count on an individual farm level. And I would count vets and SQPs and so on as people who have really fallen between the stools there and really need to upskill. And I think we've got a couple of questions on that as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, Eric. Those questions are coming in, and I mean, Gemma says, how do we do that? I don't honestly know, Gemma. We try really, really hard. One of the things that within SCOPS we get criticised for at times is, oh, well, why all sheep farmers doing SCOPS principles? You've been at it for 17 years. What have you been doing? And one of the things that we've had to work very, very hard on is to try and get the messages out to the advisors first, because there's absolutely no point in getting a lot of messages out to farmers if and when they then go to their vet or SQP Rama advisor and they say to them, oh, you don't want to bother with that. And I could write you a book. It happens, and it happens all the time. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that, again, this is an area where I feel we need to put some effort and resource on our collective resources. And somebody else is having a bit of a pop, I think, at the SQPs and Ramas. Well, no, Andy,
No pop.
Okay, and I agree. Huge amounts of, both the training authority and the merchants are on SCOPS, and they work really hard with us. But these people, let's be honest about it. They're the ones who have the contact with the farmer, and 80% of anthelmintics are sold via that channel in the UK. So they're the ones that have the contact, mostly at point of sale. Now, you could argue that maybe decoupling prescription from sale, that's one of the things that's talked about a lot, and I'm sure that has got merit. But these guys, they don't get much time. So, equally, we are trying desperately to upskill them, and we are about to move to, and hopefully it'll be mandatory, a written prescription that they have to do. So they have to take the time to ask the farmer some questions before they prescribe and sell the anthelmintic. And for me, that would make, because it's a pause, it's a time to ask the questions, and it's a time to start getting some of those messages across. And I can see Jim sat there, and I know Jim, Jim's one of our vets out there who does this all the time. And I'm sure you've got some comment, Jim.
I've made a comment in the chat.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It would be fantastic.
Part of the problem is that they are cheap. So farmers just want them to use them. If they were more expensive, there'd be more of a thought process behind them. If you're handing over 20 quid for every lamb, then you start thinking, well, but if you're handing over 10p, they think, well, yeah, just do it. And I think that would be a big change, but I can't see prices going up. They always seem to be driving down.
Competition, but then on the other side of that, we've got the group 4, group 5, Zolvix and StarTech that aren't cheap. And there's a lot of effort to try to persuade farmers to integrate those at this stage. Don't leave them, and because we know we're going to get resistance to those if we leave them until the other 3 are completely shot. But again, that's quite an uphill battle, isn't it, to try to get them to do that when apparently they think what they're doing is still working.
And Leslie, I think that's one of the keys. Is actually a lot of farmers think they're all still working for the farmer, and that absolutely is the key. And when I look at sales figures throughout the country, they're very, very different depending on the SQPs or Ramas who are talking to the farmers. And the problem here is not with the SQPs and Ramas. I'm utterly supportive of them, Leslie. I work very hard with them. I'm not having a pop, I can promise. But I think it is key that they are taught and trained such that they're giving a similar opinion to the vets, and there's no value in them saying something different to the vet. And so if we can start to get them saying things which are similar, so the whole industry is working together, and there's a lot of lack of collaboration going on in this industry, and that doesn't help, I think. But I'd be really interested to see what your projects you guys are involved with around how are you changing some of that collaborative piece for SQPs, Ramas, vets, and farmers are all working together rather than in separate spheres and silos.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And and we do try blooming hard to do that, but there is historically still this sort of and I understand why. Of course I understand why, but in it there are really good examples where, of course, we've got some of the big vet practices now where they have Ramas involved, and or they have a collaboration, and it works really well. There are some really good examples, and maybe that's what we have to work a little bit more on to show people that it can work.
It is very much a them and us mentality and a business competition, isn't it? So nobody wants to talk on the same page in general. We have really good relationship with the merchant down the road from us, and he's a client of our practice as well. So that puts us in a slightly better position, because sometimes if I hear a bad story about one of his SQPs, I'll just ring up and go, "What's going on?" and usually find out that the story is not true and it's just a rumor. So it's not easy at all. But I think one of the biggest challenge, well, one of the things we have in this area is the majority of our farmers are probably over the age of 60, certainly over 50, and they're not interested in technology. They're not interested in the EID doing the weights and the weight gains, like daily weight gains and that sort of thing. So to try and get them to get involved with TSTs is a nightmare. Whereas you've got younger ones that are keen on it, they see the benefits of it. You can work with them easier. And I think in some ways we have to focus on the easy wins. Otherwise we're going to end up disheartened and won't get anywhere, and just immensely frustrating.
I agree with you to some extent there, Jim, but I think sometimes you can get traction with the older farmers on the basis of husbandry. So Gerald Coles is a great advocate of farmers' eye-based TST. But it's difficult to generalize, because when a farmer knows whether that individual needs help or not, sometimes it's difficult to extract exactly what they're looking at, but it does at least reward knowledge of your own animals and experience in husbandry. And I think, I don't think it's an age barrier to get farmers on board to recognize that some individuals perform better than others, and that they don't all need treatment, and that's going to save you money. So maybe again, it's a communication plan that is appropriate for the individual farmer, rather than a single message that we try to force down everyone's throat.
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, if you look at the extension since it was first developed hundreds of years ago, really, farmers learning from farmers and having that group, that peer pressure and so on, I think is absolutely critical. And if that also involves an advisor, their vet, their and local merchants and so on, everybody works together, as you were saying, Andy, that's really the key to it. Most farmers, and Eric, you're absolutely right with the work in terms of what makes farmers, it's not that it's big scary monster, really, it's empowerment. They don't feel as though they're empowered to do it, but if they're in a peer group that helps them on that journey and supports each other, and history tells us that's how farmers learn from each other. And it doesn't matter, all over the world, there are some fantastic examples of that.
I think this might be a good time to bring either Elias or Smaro in, just because very often you're dealing with limited production recording in Mediterranean countries, maybe a variety of flock sizes, a variety of farmers in terms of age and technological uptake. And I'm just wondering what approaches they found might be more tractable to persuade those farmers to consider things like targeted treatment.
Also, Eric, I think it's a different world talking about dairy sheep farming, because there are great limitations in which drugs that they can also provide to the farmer. So like Zolvix and other drugs never made it in Greece. Whatever is difficult to use during lactation, it's a no-no, and that's another big story. But I totally agree with you. I've seen older people that they are more open and they want to hear new things and to apply new things, and younger people that they think they know everything. So the approach is the most important thing. And for us, yes, as you say, we are different flock sizes, and that depends to the area and to the species sometimes. I think goats, they tend to be sometimes larger when they are more professional in areas, but they don't know enough. Definitely body weight is not the main issue. Lactation is the key. And they also have different ideas. I've seen sometimes in spring when there is new grass and there is some diarrhea, they think it's a parasite. So when they want to treat, they just say that what it has diarrhea, and what does not come up in body weight, then they think parasites. our main problem is that we cannot convince them to, I don't know what Elias also has to say, we cannot convince them to do fecal accounts. It's much easier for the vet to sell the drugs. And it's also convenient treatment before lambing, that they go with the vaccines together and they just do that. So it's very difficult to get to the vets and then get to the farmers. They are not happy of going through this process when they can easily sell the drugs.
Well, I would like to point out some Facebook farmer groups where they have, for example, the small ruminant group per area, etc. And these groups, of course, they aim to help each other, but in some cases they are really catastrophic because they recommend absolutely wrong antiparasitics. They don't care about withdrawal periods. So contrary to what you have said or what you believe in your country, sometimes in Greece could be really catastrophic. In order to implement a proper antiparasitic strategic plan. The other peculiarity is that in Greece, practically we have lambing all year round. We don't have a very precise season. We have the lambing season could be October, but if you go to a flock, you can see animals giving birth all year. And sometimes farmers like this because they can sell the meat during various seasons. But this also is a difficult plan to make a proper antiparasitic strategy. And if you compare that we have very dry summer, this is a trap. A very dry summer is a trap because refugia is not a case. And we have the good example of small islands where they are very isolated and very dry during summer. So in such cases, resistance is increasing rapidly. As Maro said, we have very common practice, mixed flocks, sheep and goats. And that's another issue, which is, I guess, very difficult to the rest of Europe. Because they don't adjust the dosage to the different host, but they keep the same dose rate to all animals. Sometimes, as Maro said again, we have some infectious diseases like paratuberculosis, which is very popular, and the clinical symptom we see is loss of weight. And the first thing the farmer can think of is parasites, and then if they see no improvement, they blame resistance, which is not the case, of course. Practically, these are more or less our difficulties, and we don't use body weight or body condition score. Usually, the milk yield is what farmers accept as an indication for targeted treatments. But again, it is not very reliable because animals belong to different crossbreeds, so what they accept is very variable within the flock. That's all.
I think that brings things back to a point raised by Jim Hopkins also. It's around test, don't guess, isn't it? You assume the parasites might be the problem, but without evidence, it could be inappropriate to treat those. And it would be nice to have more tools to evaluate what the level of challenge is. We have tried a lot to improve pasture larval count methodology by connecting lawnmowers with washing machines and all very Wallace and Gromit type contraptions. It's very difficult to scale that because the parasites, the larvae are so variably distributed around the pasture. They move up and down as well with the weather. It's very, very difficult, even in a research setting, to get reliable measures of larvae and grass, which is why we've moved more towards predictive pasture contamination mapping based on grazing history and fecal egg count. Fecal egg counts, though, I think can be very useful, especially if they're applied regularly. So it's not so much going in at the one time and looking at fecal egg counts, because then the question is, are they high? Are they above threshold? Are they high enough to treat? Are they causing the problem? But if the farmers are in the habit of regularly monitoring fecal egg counts, either through their own methods or at pooled level, they can see when there's an uplift. They might also selectively sample those animals that are scouring and those that aren't, and they can see a difference. And you do get a picture. You also build up an experience base. When I visited farms in New Zealand where fecal egg counts are quite routinely done, they will start to say things like, well, in that past show, we normally see an uplift of trikes at this time of year. We've seen it a bit earlier this year. That experience and that knowledge and that empowerment just grows because they're getting a data stream. And I just want to reiterate what I said yesterday, that and what Leslie said again today. You start small, you start to get an appreciation that is not one fixed rule. There's flexibility, information is needed and valuable. And then regardless of which system you're working in, then farmers will invent their own solutions, but they'll be appropriate and they'll be backed up by advisors. Not everyone has had the chance to speak. Oh, sorry, Smaro.
No, I was just echoing what you said. It's start small is the key, and maybe to try to find the best of the group to advocate what is happening, because they tend to mimic, and if somebody has an outcome, then they will follow. So they may resist in the beginning, but they follow. So we have to think small. That's the key, I think.
Yeah, I think that has been a problem, in that, you know, there has been a tendency for all of us, I think, to go piling in sometimes. And for a lot of these farmers, you know, piling in with fecal egg counts is, if they don't get a good experience, you are back to not square one, but even worse. And you know, I get very worried about people using fecal egg counting as a diagnostic when it's done on a mob basis. It's a monitoring tool, and it's done in context, and out of context, it's dangerous. You know, I mean, and a lot of people nodding. We've all had those cases, haven't we? And it's worrying.
I think it's where, Leslie, and you've commented in the chat that Dr. Google is a dangerous thing, or forums is a dangerous thing, and I think it's where that initial engagement and that will to work collaboratively has got to underpin any step forward, really, isn't it, to provide that safety net?
I think so. You know, the days when I first had been an advisor, and I'm one of these people that are the wrong side of the big 6-0 now, so I'm counting myself as being out of the door. But you know, in my day when we first started, you know, you were an advisor and what you said went. You know, okay, I could still shout at some of my clients, but not anymore. You know, doctors are the same, vets, you will find the same. They walk into the surgery, they've already done an hour's of research on the internet. So we have to be a lot smarter and a lot more aware of the person than perhaps we used to be.
Is there anything, do you think, as an industry we should be doing to challenge misinformation? I know, for example, Scots have got a great website with a lot of information on there relevant to the different stakeholders. Is that somewhere we should be looking towards?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to think we're a hub of information. There's just been something gone on there today, actually, because in the UK, the environmental aspects of using antiparasiticides, as you know, Sinead, has been raised, and we've just put a statement on there so that there is a balanced statement for people to go to. And you know, we try to be, if you like, the voice of reason, where people can go and they can trust what's on there. So I'd love some feedback from other people.
And Leslie, I was going to ask 2 questions and you brought it up, so I'll ask a second question now. One's, what's your first small step? Which I think is an interesting question. You know, where do you start? And the second one is I was on a webinar the other day on AHDB where the beetles were very important, and it was actually a really good talk, to be fair, Leslie.
Was it the AHDB one last Thursday night?
Was.
Yeah, I was on it. I was on it, and it was very balanced. Very good. Yes.
Is that actually, for me, there's an interesting route into farmers through that. One of the interesting pieces of data in there is, if it's true, if it comes out, but it's right, but you know, if you're killing off all your beetles, you're decreasing grass production by 18%, which I was stunned by. If that becomes true, is that a route into some of these conversations?
For some farmers, I think it will be. You know, because for some of them, and increasingly the way the UK is going, obviously, since Brexit, dare I don't mention the B word, you know, we are looking at more money being paid towards public goods and the environmental aspects of it. And it may well be that, you know, if there's money there, it will encourage even more people to go. So the thing that we've got to guard against, I think, is that obviously there are some more out on a limb lobby groups who were starting to think that a withdrawal period actually had anything to do with the environmental persistence of a product and so, oh yes. So we were starting to see some very, very silly choices on treatment as a result. So we've had to go in and start to balance that up. But I think it's whatever that person is on their mind. They've got lots of things on their mind, and if it's beetles and so on, that's where you start the conversation. You know, as a consultant, my husband has this thing he puts up on my screen. He says, Leslie not only listens, she understands. And that might sound silly, but you do have to understand what that person is going to respond to, and it might be something completely different. You know, I'll get called out to a farm for one problem, and actually the real problem is about 1 million miles that side of left field, but you have to deal with the person. So it's small wins, and it might just be that, you know, very often the reason you're there is that, oh, well, the lambs aren't growing very well, I'm getting too many store lambs, what am I going to do about it? I've poured every mineral and trace element drench down their throats I can think of. Where do I start next? And you know, you don't pile in and say, well, your wormers aren't working, you're making a mess of that. You've got to get some information and gradually build a little bit of a relationship.
Thanks, Leslie. I don't know whether there's anybody else on the call who hasn't shared their personal experiences within their countries who'd like to do so before we draw the session to a close. No? Oh, well, in which case, thank you all for your participation. Perhaps if I can hand back to you, Leslie, for some final thoughts. And then move to the break and the final session of the day.
Thanks,
so
Sinead. If you
could send somebody away with a key message, Leslie, what would it be?
Just let's think about what it is, our objectives. Let's think about the people. Anthelmintic resistance and sustainable worm control is as much about the people as it is about the worms and the animals, I think, in my book, and that's the way we're going to make it, and it's everybody concerned. So when we're looking at R&D, whether we're a consultant or whatever, we've all got to move together. As Andy was saying, you know, we've got to move together on this, and it might mean we're a little bit slower at times, but the progress will be, we'll have a backstop and it'll be consistent progress. Yeah, I think that would be my main message. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, thank you. No, it's been a great session. Eric, if we come to you for a second, what would your parting shot be?
I think coming back probably to that first step, it doesn't have to be big. If it's based on some new bit of information or monitoring, that's a win. And it moves the dial a little bit in the direction of sustainability. And that is your traction. So I think the challenge for advisors is probably to find that one bit that is feasible, easy, low risk, fits with the farmer's personality and structural and social context and production objectives, and get one bit of information that will change their worming practices in the right direction. And that's probably when you start to get somewhere.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Thanks for that. And thank you all for your participation. I think we've really tackled some of the key issues here. You know, we've highlighted the fact that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach for this, and it's interesting to hear how that's true at both the local level and at a global level as well. So thanks for your participation. I think for me, one of the takeaways is that human side of thinking, that engagement in that first step, and maintaining it. And it's certainly a message I'll take away with me today and in our activities as a company producing anthelmintics going forward. So with that, I'll draw the session to a close. And if you'd like to join us back in the main auditorium after the break, that would be fantastic. Again, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Leslie. And thanks to all of you for the great debate.